Welcome to the Poetry of Predicament Podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world.
All right. Hi, everybody. This is Dean Walker, Poetry of Predicament Podcast. And it is September 7th. And just had a couple of things that I wanted to catch up on. I know I've been putting out a couple of kind of unusual updates for me. I'm not nearly as frequent a contributor or as good a contributor as so many of the other YouTube channel folks that are out there and pumping it out daily, and they're doing such a great job. But every once in a while, there are a couple of pieces that really hit me hard, and they are more about the human element than just the statistics for me. And so that's what gets my attention. That's what I'm going to relay for the most part in my sharing of this kind of stuff. So the first thing that I want to tell you about is from the Moscow Times, and I'm going to see if I can share my screen with you. So this is from the Moscow Times. Just a couple days ago, Russian ministry warns of coming environmental apocalypse fueled by climate change. The Russian Ministry of Environmental Concerns. Russia's environmental ministry has published a report that paints an apocalyptic future for the country due to climate change, with consequences including epidemics, drought, mass flooding, and hunger. So I realize that none of us is particularly surprised at any of this, that they would be discovering those things. And why I'm bringing it to us today is because I am absolutely shocked that they are reporting it as apparently directly as they are. So anyway, while Russia has been slated to reap economic benefits from a modest rise in global temperatures, which are expected to open navigation in the Arctic and allow for more economic activity in the winter, the country has allocated an estimated 1.55 trillion rubles, which is about $22 billion, on a new environmental program to promote air pollution reduction, reforestation, and recycling. At 900 pages, the draft report published by the Natural Resources and Environment Ministry on Monday breaks down the past and future consequences of climate change in the country. Here are the key findings. Death from environmental disasters in Russia have increased 11-fold between 2016 and 2017. Temperatures in Russia increased at more than double the rate of the world's average of 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade. More than double, y'all. Concentration of greenhouse gases driven by economic and population growth in the past 2 centuries reached record levels last year. This has led to unprecedented, at least in the last 800,000 years, levels of atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. At 4.5%, Russia contributed the world's 4th most greenhouse gas emissions, behind China, the USA, and India. Ministry report says it is 95% confident that human activity contributed to global warming observed since the middle of the 20th century. Again, this I find shocking that they are able to put that out, because that this kind of report, just like the IPCC report, is heavily edited by very biased editorial representatives from both corporate and governmental agencies in the USA. and actually other power players from around the world. But you can only imagine what sort of editing they've got going on in Russia. So anyway, future dangers. Moscow and other big cities are at risk of warmer weather and increasing pollution, while the elderly in central and rather southern Russia face the danger of heat waves. Other regions can become hotbeds of disease due to contaminated drinking water and insects, the draft report warns. Southern Russia is at risk of more accidents linked to the deformation of railways in extremely high temperatures. And that, of course, is going on around the world. Overheating of buildings during heat waves causes increased energy consumption and contributes to energy and water supply emergencies in the urban population in central Russia. Melting permafrost in and around the Russian Arctic could lead to dangerous chemical, biological, and radioactive substances entering the human habitat. Interesting that they say that way, and they don't seem to be implying anything about the Arctic methane situation from their permafrost, and in addition to all the other areas of permafrost around the Arctic. Forest fires in Siberia and other territories risk becoming a more common occurrence, causing more emissions and threatening lives. The Far East will be prone to flash floods and monsoons. The ministry's role, an anonymous government source said this year's unexpected focus on the after effects of climate change, quote, probably mean the ministry intends to become the chief climate policy developer and coordinator. That role is currently shared between the Natural Resources Ministry, the Economic Development Ministry, and the Energy Ministry, in addition to the Industry and Trade Ministry, according to Kommersant Business Daily. Kommersant Business Daily. That's why they're laying the groundwork so that they could cite their report when needed, the unnamed official told the outlet Tuesday. So I'm going to shift just briefly to an article about Maersk. You may recognize Maersk as a shipping line, and there was some mention here of the commercial benefits of global warming, and just in this Moscow Times article. Well, Maersk has just in the past week or so had the first trans-Arctic shipment of one of its container ships crossing over the Arctic Circle unescorted. Now, I can't say that it was unescorted. I think it's extremely likely that Russia had one of its many icebreakers out there with it. In fact, probably realistically, although I don't know this, I would imagine they were breaking trail for them, even though the ice is easily broken by an unarmored ship. So that Maersk ship was the first one to be going through, and it's hardly now going to be, it's not going to be a regular occurrence year-round by any stretch of the imagination. But I think we all know that as we approach an authentic blue water event, that once that occurs, the good old exponential curve will kick in because because of exactly that, the blue water event being far more absorptive of heat, and then reducing the atmosphere or the conditions in which ice can return in the winter. So, but this is the first one, so it's worth mentioning. Of course, we've seen it on mainstream media, on every one of our usual sources. Yeah, no, not so much. All right, and next we've got Senator Hirono from Hawaii talking with Brett Kavanaugh during his recent appearance to be confirmed or not for the Supreme Court position. And I think you may find this interesting. I find it a remarkable job of schooling this very privileged, very white male in what it is to be a human being rather than the, I'm not really sure what he qualifies as at this point. I've got very little to say about Mr. Kavanaugh. So anyway, Senator Hirono schooling Kavanaugh.
In 1999, you also published an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal under your own name entitled, quote, "Are Hawaiians Indians?" In the piece you wrote, the Native Hawaiian community was not indigenous because, as you said, after all, they came from Polynesia. It might interest you to know that Hawaii is part of Polynesia. Native Hawaiians did not come from Polynesia. They were part of Polynesia. You also implied that Native Hawaiians couldn't qualify as an Indian tribe and therefore were not entitled to constitutional protections given to indigenous Americans because, and I quote you, they don't have their own government, they don't have their own elected leaders. To say that there is no system of laws is an insult to the society that evolved in the Hawaiian Islands over centuries, even before the creation of the United States. To say they don't have their own elected leaders in a historical sense just betrays, in my view, your ignorance of Native Hawaiians. They were a self-sustaining, self-governing society for 1,000 years prior to the so-called discovery by Captain Cook. You said they don't live on reservations or in territorial enclaves. They don't even live together in Hawaii. It's hard to know what to say to this assertion. It sounds like you're saying that Native groups in the United States derive their rights from having been herded into reservations and cheated out of their land, or that they surrendered their rights when they move outside of these artificial boundaries. It is not only factually wrong, but also very offensive. Judge Kavanaugh, it is hard to believe that you spent any time researching the history of Native Hawaiians. Now, I'm going to refer to an email that you
May I respond to that?
sent out. I'm going to get to my question.
Okay.
You sent out an email on June 4th, 2002, and I'm going to read in part. Any programs targeting Native Hawaiians as a group is subject to strict scrutiny and of questionable validity under the Constitution.
Senator, I think Congress has substantial power, of course, in this area that you're discussing. And I would want to hear more about how rice applies. I would want to hear the arguments on both sides. I would keep an open mind and appreciate your perspective on this question.
When the Supreme Court keeps an open mind and listens to the litigants and the advocates, one would hope that the advocates will actually proffer facts to the court, and that is not what you did when you filed your amicus to the court. And I think you have a problem here. Your view is that Native Hawaiians don't deserve protections as indigenous people under the Constitution. And your argument raises a serious question about how you would rule on the constitutionality of programs benefiting Alaska Natives. I think that my colleagues from Alaska should be deeply troubled by your views. And I know that in your amicus brief and in your Wall Street article, you did not mention one word about Alaska Natives. And it could be because there is no Commerce Clause reference to Alaska Natives as there is for American Indian tribes.
All right. So I just find that excruciating. And so the last piece that I wanted to put in was also about the Arctic. And we've all been hearing for months now about the wildfires in Sweden, of all places. They've had a very rough year, and I don't know how many of us know that don't live in Sweden. I'm not clear how many of us know about the drought that they have been suffering under for quite some time as well. And because of that drought, they're very likely to be losing a large number of their reindeer population in Sweden. So just a kind of a cap on top of it all in today's very brief Poetry of Predicament podcast update. This is September, I think I mentioned it to you at the beginning there, September 7th. And we're just in the first week of an online trauma summit, which can be subscribed to at any point. We're definitely planning on offering it for people to be watching only the recordings after the summit is done. But if you subscribe now, you'll be able to catch the rest of the Q&A sessions, which are live. And I think it's going to be quite extraordinary. Just a couple of nights ago, we had Leonard Pitts, acclaimed columnist from the Miami Herald, speaking with us. And a couple of days before that, we had Derek Jensen. And upcoming on this next Monday, we have Lisa Van Susteren, who's a remarkable psychiatrist and public mental health advisor, policy advisor. She's an extraordinary voice for resilience and for sanity in what is clearly an insane world that is in which human beings are killing themselves and God knows how many other species on the planet. So you could feel free to join us on that. We will I'll put up the link on that. And then also we have a Resilience Bridge, a workshop, 3-day workshop coming up in October 11th to 14th. That's also got a link available in the show notes or right there on the screen. Love to have you join us. All right. Thanks for watching and checking in today.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. You may want to check out our sister podcasts, the New Lifeboat Hour with Carolyn Baker on Podbean and at carolynbaker.net. Also, the Impossible Conversation podcast, another channel on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us. Join us again later for another episode of the Poetry of Predicament.